Hey everybody, Hostrom here with another first edition Friday video for you. This video we're gonna take a step back for a moment. I'm not gonna go over any new deck lists that I've come up with. I'm not gonna new dilemma strategies or anything like that, as is my usual fare. This video is just going to take a step back and talk about issues that are going on in the realm of organized play, tournament play specifically, decks and cards that have become of concern, and what is possibly going to happen to them, will happen to them soon, or maybe should happen to them soon. So we're just going to focus on those issues today. So no new decks, no new combos, none of that sort of thing. So as promised, we're going to talk about Austrian Nationals, since that is a kind of focal point, a locus point for some of the issues that have come up. So let's just go ahead and dive in, and we'll actually start there. We're going to just go ahead and start with Austrian Nationals and what happened there. So if you haven't been paying attention the last week or two, then this will be new information for you, but for most of my viewers you'll be aware of this, and that is that Mr. Stefan Slavy brought a deck to Austrian Nationals that absolutely abused the new wording on gaps in normal space. Now, the scuttlebutt is that the change in wording opened up a possibility with this card that hadn't been there before in the original wording. Design, rules, playtesting. It's unclear who was aware of that change and who wasn't, and there has been disagreement as to whether or not they were actually planning on making the change back, but then just simply didn't, whether or not they were genuinely concerned about that or not. None of that is clear. What is clear is that after it was spoiled, after the card was spoiled, Stefan did give everyone a fair warning that he thought it was a problem and that he planned on taking advantage of that. So the issue is that the previous wording of gaps required that it had to go between two mission cards, so you couldn't string gaps along. Under the new wording, it just inserts into the space line. So you can put your first gap in between two missions, and then you can just start adding more gaps right down the line, and you can push two missions to 8 span, 8 span of gaps, and then the mission span, which basically means that like hardly any ships are going to be able to cross it, which means then from an opponent to get from mission A to mission B with 2 gaps in between, they're going to probably have someone get randomly killed on board before they can get to that next mission. It also means that it takes an entire another turn for them to make that journey. And then there's the simple fact that if you're able to get like these in between like a lot of missions, then you're putting a ton of space in between missions, thus really slowing down the game for the opponent. Gaps is normally a card play. Of course, Stefan was using copies of Parallax Arguers to try to play them for free. He was, of course, using additional card plays with Horgon when he would acquire a Horgon, turn 3, turn 4, turn 5, somewhere in there when he would complete his opening planet mission, and then he would be able to play 2 gaps per turn, and he was, of course, getting all the gaps into his hand with smooth as an android's bottom. He was getting so many additional non-personnel into his hand that getting lots of copies of gaps was not that big of a deal. He also could just simply call event with Beyond the Subatomic to try to highly likely put one into his hand if he needed to, but I would assume that he was probably using his Beyond the Subatomics for other things, probably mostly to pull one of his doorways so that he could possibly rip a Disruptor Overload or something like that. it's hard to say what he was doing exactly. His tournament report isn't obviously not that specific, nor would I ever expect it to be. And then, of course, what he has said openly is that he was basically just kind of doing that. What he was exactly doing with Beyond the Subatomic is probably like situational, but with nanoprobes and stuff like that, and Paler Toffs and everything that goes along with all the smooths and that entire draw engine, I'm sure he was able to do quite a bit of damage with it, at least early enough in the game, because you see where your opponents start, and then you just start separating that opponent from their nearby missions, and then with 2 copies of space and sticking a black hole in an alpha quadrant opponent's space line, you're putting a lot of pressure on them to be able to do stuff with. One thing that I did find surprising about Stefan's deck is no dead end. I would think that dead end, being able to keep an opponent off a particular planet mission, would be highly useful to him. So I was a little surprised about that. What I was not surprised about is just, the fact that being able to use the Vidian surgicals as your very extremely efficient engine allowed him to play with 22 dilemmas. So, that in and of itself, even without a dead end, is still going to be pretty strong. I'm not going to comment on the exact layout of these dilemmas outside of the dead end, because some of these make total sense. Like, obviously, you want to play with Dark Matter Pockets to get free copies of Gaps into play. The Emergent Life Form is just ridiculously strong when you can put it next to some gaps, and you can just like move the ship and kill people and keep your opponent away from missions, fly an opponent's ship directly into a black hole, all the classic stuff. So, but outside of that, he knows his meta better than I do, so I'm not going to comment on that too hard. Obviously, like garbage scows make a lot of sense too. They'll make missions take longer and stuff like that. But while I mean, obviously, I think gaps in this form is a problem. It's kind of hard to balance that against like the fact that there are counter strategies to it. But again, the measure of whether or not something should be nerfed is not whether or not there are counter strategies to it. It's whether or not those counter strategies are reasonably able to be put into like every deck. And playing with a lot of copies of Quantum Slipstream Drive is not really reasonable, because that would slow a lot of decks down to a point where, like, if you're just putting it in for the the gaps opponent, that's you're just going to slow your deck down significantly against another opponent. It's just not a really reasonable ask. The Borg Transwarp is Borg only. Transwarp Conduit as an interrupt makes a lot more sense, because you can double your range and you can just go right through those gaps. But again, you're diluting your deck, and with the rewording on Transwarp, it's limited now to 1 doubling in a turn on a particular ship. Time locations with UFP1 small step is a much more reasonable answer, but that's going to be 22nd century only decks. That's not available to everyone. So I do think Gaps does need to be sent back to its original wording, just with a slightly, like an updated wording, but it still needs to be like sent back to its original intention, which is to only be able to stick 1 in between a mission. That'll still make it decent. It just won't be nearly as abusive as it was before. So it will probably get changed to insert between two missions as a span for space location and all that. It's going to be as simple as that. So I would expect to see that change here in first Monday of March. Now, let's talk about another problem card in this deck. I and a couple other people have been saying for quite a while that Smooth as an Android's Bottom is a bit of a problem. I think it was great. The card came back. Let's see here. I don't think, yeah, it's never gone through any wording changes, but I believe it was banned for a while. Yes, it was definitely banned for a while, but it came back, and yeah, like it is proving to be a bit of a problem. It is on the watch list, and rightfully so. And so I have been told that it's, I mean, you're going to see this video and then it's literally going to be a couple days later, but I have been told that Smooth as an Android's Bottom is getting an errata, and that errata is supposed to come out on Monday the 3rd. So, March 3rd, 2025. So, where it's at right now is not where it's going to be at. I have been told what the change is, and it's exactly the change that I would make, and it is the change that makes like logical sense. I don't know that I can spoil it exactly, but I'll just tell you right now that it's still going to be good, but it is not going to be quite as abusive as it was before, in the sense you're not going to be able to quote, one, use it as much, and one of the supposed downsides of the card that has been turned into an upside of the card is now going to be turned back into being a downside of the card. So if you've been enjoying Smooth as an Android's Bottom in this gigantic engine, you're still going to be able to do that, but it is not going to be as good. And so we'll see whether or not that is enough to change things. It certainly would. I think that it would certainly change how exactly this deck would be able to operate over the long term of a game, in the sense that, let's assume for a moment that Gaps gets a nerf back to it. Stefan's going to redesign the deck where it's not playing as many gaps, because there's only so many slots that you can stick the gaps in between, that you want to stick it in between, and so there's no need to play with as many of them. But let's say that he then replaces gaps with other stuff, right? Yes, the Smooth as Android's Bottom is going to still draw a bunch of cards. You're only getting half as many, which, for those of you who are smart enough to know this, the card's going to go from once every turn to once each turn. So you're only going to be able to play it on your own turn, which is still good. But it does mean that the potential draw power of the deck is basically being halved, which is necessary, I think. But the other change that's going to be made is that instead of the personnel going to the discard pile, they're going to be removed from the game. So in this deck, if you start using too many Smooth as an Android's Bottom, you're going to just be flat out losing those people forever. So if you get unlucky and you hit your Motura, right, he hits his Motura or he hits his Dinarapel early, well then that guy's gone forever. You're not doing a second chance at life to get him back. So I think that's going to be a significant nerfing of Smooth. It's not going to kill the card, I don't think. I still think there's going to be ways and reasons for people to use it, but I think that this gigantic deck engine is going to get toned down a bit. So, but we'll see how people adapt to that. So again, too long, didn't listen. Gaps in normal space has been banned. It's gonna come back, I would assume, with its original wording. And then Smooth as an Android's Bottom is getting a nerf bat taken to it. So this deck is not going to be playable at all after this point. So Stefan made his point, and adjustments are being made. I will say, as a side point, total non-issue here, his use of Beware of Q, awesome, love it, no notes. I think it's great, and I think that we're going to see more of this as people get more sophisticated with what they're doing. I think that if you've got an extra seed slot and you're playing with the Q Flash to be able to play with all the fun Q cards, especially Anti-Time Anomaly and stuff, I think that this use of Beware of Q is fantastic. It definitely opens you up to keeping a lot of non-Q dilemmas out there, so that you have a lot more options for hurting an opponent, and you're not necessarily reliant on abusing the opponent with Q. So, yeah. So look for more of that in the future. So that was Stefan's deck. We'll take a look at Johan's deck. There's nothing abusive in here. I just want to talk about Johan's deck since we're talking about Australian Nationals here. I absolutely love his use of Subjugate Planet onto Diplomatic Conference so that he can score 60 points for Dominion in the Alpha Quadrant. That's fun. I like that. And then using Empok Nor, also a lot of fun. Yeah, I definitely like what Johans is doing with this deck. Johans does a great job with his deck designs. I'm a big fan of a lot of the ins and outs of when Johans built a deck. I'm a big fan of a lot of his small decisions, not necessarily the bigger decisions with his decks, but I'm a huge fan of the corner work that he does with his decks. So I'm a little disappointed that his deck didn't do better, but reading his report, some of it was bad luck and some of it was of course just he runs up against Stefan's broke deck and was able to pull out a true tie with it that he could have squeaked out a win on. But he was very smart and just allowed Stefan to drop some gaps for free with arguers here, which allowed him to stay in it for the true tie. So it's just unfortunate that he wasn't able to I mean, it proves the power of Khan, exclamation point, that he had some of his, here we go, canceled his bonus points from Victory of Life, which is Khan. Stefan used Khan to do that, which ends up being a big deal because, just 5 points would have given Johans the mod win, and then we have an entirely different tournament going on. So, yeah, very interesting. So, I like that. I like Johan's deck here. Since Julius posted his deck, we'll take a quick look at this one. He is cloning his unique Makos like Major Reed and Hideki Chang, which is cool because your other Makos here are attributes +1, so he gets multiple attributes +1. Let's see here, and then Fiona is also clonable. So I don't really, I'll be honest with you, I'm not really sure whether cloning those particular Makos is worth the juice. Is the squeeze, is the juice worth the squeeze on that? An entire seed slot devoted to that? I don't know. It's hard to say. I think it's fun. That's 100% fun. So I'm totally down with Julius's idea of doing it in the first place because the deck just looks fun. Props to anybody trying to make Makos work because Makos has so many issues with it as far as a deck. So good for him for giving it a try. So yeah, very interesting deck here. I just, if you're gonna do that, you don't necessarily have to 100% meme it. You don't gotta thematic it to down to the wire. I definitely think that there are some Starfleeters that he could have probably put into the deck that he could have gotten into play because he does have a Starfleet outpost. He does commandeer Empok Nor. He could have got some of those other Starfleet personnel into play to make the deck a little bit better at attempting missions and stuff. So it's just a thought. Yeah, so that's Austrian Nationals. Like I said, the big takeaway from it is the fact that Stefan abused gaps in normal space, and it's going to be forced back into its original wording. And of course, it again proves that smooth as an android's bottom is a problem. I think it's great that they brought it back and gave it a chance, but it clearly is a problem. It's allowing a lot of bloat decks to get a lot of card draw very easily. So a little bit of a problem. It needs to be toned down a bit. So I I'm not personally a fan of playing big, huge blow decks. I don't feel comfortable playing them. And when I've been testing Smooth as an Android's Modem, it's so user friendly and so good that even I'm like enjoying it, like how good it is. And I don't like playing decks that are bigger than 50 cards outside of Borg. So the fact that it was like making me put a 150 card deck together and being like, this works, that's a bit of a problem in my opinion. It's not good. Like if if me, the efficiency player, is like building a 150 card deck going, I'm not worried about this not working, like that's dangerous. So yeah. Alright. So those are the the major issues. Now let's go back and let's talk about the watch list. Okay. So these are the cards that are currently on the watch list. Now, Planet Killer was banned, and then it's been brought back. Now, it was brought back because Obsession got its own nerf. Obsession got its own nerf again. This card's been like hit a couple of times. It no longer does range plus weapons for bonus points. It's now simply double range, and it only hits and it only works on self-controlling dilemmas without a point box. So now Planet Killer is only going to score you 10 points when you blow it up. You're not going to get 16 or 22. Sorry, you're not going to get 26 or even 22. You're going to get 10, right? So Planet Killer is back to being a decent dilemma. Like, you can score some bonus points off of it, but like your ability to smash it is now a lot more, a lot more reasonable, because when you think about the seed investment it takes seeding Obsession, then it takes seeding the Planet Killer, or at the very least you seed the Obsession and then you can blow it up once. So Obsession is essentially worth 10 points to you, and then the other ones that you might blow up with Obsession are also going to probably be just worth 10 points or 12 points, because most of the non-point boxy self-controlling dilemmas have either 5 range or 6 range. Now I know that Space Amoeba's got a 7 on it, so you can pull 14 points out of Space Amoeba, but you also have to make additional investment to be able to hit that one, because it forces your weapons down below its shields. No matter how big your ship is, it's forcing it down. So you do have to make additional investment, which then is fine. That additional investment is worth then those additional 2 points, right? So I do like the change to Obsession. I do like the fact that because of that change to Obsession, that it was able to make it so that Planet Killer didn't have to have its own errata. It was able just to come back out into the world. And I think it's going to be fine. I think I'm going to, once I have some time, I'm going to re-examine exactly what that means, what it would take to have Obsession work in a off Alpha Quadrant 2 mission win deck. Like, what do you got to all do to still make that go? Because you can Obsession for something that you can blow up for 12 points. You hit one of the six rangers, like the Shellyak, and you can blow that one up for 12, and then you can get Planet Killer for another 10 if that's what you really want to do. But again, why do Planet Killer when you can blow up one of the 6 rangers for 12? So it's really going to be a question of what is all involved, getting enough bonus points to make Obsession work. And then of course it's going to be do you want to do that entirely, or do you just self-seed a Cytherians and score 15 off a Cytherian still? So, yeah. Anyway, so that's that. The invasive drones, I don't think nothing's gonna happen with those. They're an absolutely necessary component to making aggressive Borg decks work. toning down aggressive board decks is not so much a question of toning the deck down itself. It's about giving other decks the tools that they need to be able to deal with an aggressive board deck. And as I've said before, Supernova and Anti-Time Anomaly in their new form, like being able to be back out in the world, that's good enough to like combat aggressive board decks because yes, an aggressive board deck can smash you, but then when they turn around and have to like do missions and stuff, then if you can get your Anti-Time Anomaly to go off, then the board deck is reset back to zero. They lose all of your people, they lose all the bonus points off those people, and there's a good chance that you're back in the lead again if you solved like a 35-point mission before they hit you. So I think the Anti-Time Anomaly alone is a good is a great counter. So the only investment it takes for that is to seed a Q Flash and then have some flashy Q Flash dilemmas or Q Flash enabling dilemmas under your missions, and those are usable against Borg, non-Borg opponents alike. So I don't see any reason for these to stay on here. These will fall off on their own, I'm sure, once it becomes clear that aggressive board decks are no longer as potent as they were before. George and Gracie, 15 easy bonus points, but you do have to seed their time location. You do have to have a way to go to their time location and back. And so we're talking about, a minimum 2 seed cards investment. And so you could basically say that the time location's worth 10 and the enabling card is worth 5, and so this is not really that much different than pretty much any other point thing that you could do. I don't really see a reason why George and Gracie need to change. Organ theft, I think enough time has gone on now that I think people realize that like even if you score 30 points off of organ theft, there is enough work that has to be put into it over the course of a game that it's not really that big of a deal. The Vidian decks, like what's making these new Vidian decks good, organ theft isn't the reason, the surgical stuff is the reason, right? Search for spares and the 2 surgical cards are what's making the new Vidians good. And even if you're not playing with those, then you're investing more seed cards, which means then like organ theft is like less of an issue because again, like the Vidian players investing more seed cards into stuff. So I don't see a reason why organ theft will need to have a nerf bat taken to it. I think it's going to fall off the watch list on its own. Same with the Phoenix. I mean, once again, we're talking about like, oh, cool, you play 1 card, you score 10 points. Well, you're doing that with a lot of other cards. A lot of other cards are just like drop a card, 10 points. Phoenix does in its own way require some enabling card. You have to draw it, you have to put it in your deck, you have to draw it, you have to play it. Like Phoenix, the Phoenix basically has to either be in your deck and you got to draw it, or it's got to be in your Q's 10, which means you got to have a Q10 to be able to go into the Q's 10 to get the Phoenix, which means you're not playing with the Ref 10, which, there's lots of things that are involved here. I think the Phoenix is fine. Again, I don't see a reason why it needs to stay. I don't see a reason why it's going to get abused enough to the point where it would need to be nerfed. I mean, I could be wrong on both it and Gracie, George and Gracie, and organ theft, but I don't see it. Distant control. This is one that I continue to be concerned about. And not because I think that it's abusive, but because I think that it's this right here. This card helps avoid too many game interactions. It is a source of complex rules interactions, which leads to a source of player frustration. I honestly think that distant control should be banned and reworked. And again, I make it clear, it's not because I think it's broken, it's not because I think it's abusive. I think that it's just a problem card in the sense of the fact that it makes a lot of dilemmas not do what the dilemma says that it's supposed to do. And then that leads to weird rules interactions, which leads to player frustration. It is. I mean, we don't have a lot of players left in the game, and the few like newer and younger players that we get, distant control becomes like a flashpoint of them going, well, why doesn't my love interest dilemma relocate your person? Like, love interest dilemma is a lot of the cards that distant control avoids are cards that are totally fine and totally fair and shouldn't be dicked with in that way. So, in that sense, I just don't like the card. I don't like what it avoids. I don't like the fact that it can create rules frustrations as you try to, like, in the moment of a game, try to figure out what it's supposed to do. Yeah, so what I think is that what I think personally would need to be done, and this is just off the cuff. This isn't deeply thought out. Okay, just don't quote me on this. Don't hold me to this. This is just initial thought. But if this was removed, if it was just simply may not die unless they have empathy, but then like this right here was removed, then I think that would be a big source of like that would remove a lot of the problems, right? Okay, because a lot of the problems revolve around the fact that distant control just basically says like, okay, so you're supposed to relocate somebody for this thing, but you can't. So yeah, and it creates a lot of weird interactions because of it. So that's my thought on distant control. So we'll see how that plays out. Tully and Soren is much more of the same of the like, okay, you get 20 points, but getting him under the Nexus is definitely significantly harder to do. It is, of course, only one seed card that it takes, but either you have to seed it under your opponent's mission and they have to trigger it, or you have to self-seed it and trigger it, and then it goes to the opposite end of the space line. And yeah, it's worth being watched, as is worthy of being watched. I don't necessarily think that Tully Soren needs to be like have his point box reworked down to 10 or something like that. I think he's probably fine at 20. I think that it's probably fair for the amount of time and investment it takes to do it. So that's just my thinking on that one. So I don't see him. I see him coming off I think he's scheduled to come off here real soon, isn't he? I guess I don't know how long. He was put on 4/2/24. I think it's supposed to just be 6 months, but I would have thought that he was supposed to come off yet, but maybe I'm wrong about that. No, I would think that he comes off here in April then. So, Genesis device. Now this is one that I think is one that's probably needing to take a punch. Doubling, because there's a lot of missions that are like, this is a 40-point mission, so like Genesis device is worth like 40 points in a lot of situations, like a lot of 40-point planets and stuff like that. It's, yeah, I personally think Genesis device needs a reworking. What I would like it to do, what I would like Genesis device to do instead is what I would like it to do instead is I would like it to remove the not playing Fed part, and then what I would like to do is say like, or here's the thing, what I'd like to do is like move this restriction to having it be like just down here. So it would be on your turn you may place on a planet mission here. If unsolved at the start of your next turn, choose, and then instead of worth double points, I would have it be instead of it being double, it would need to just be like worth plus 15, because like we've seen other, like we see like off sale vase is worth 15 or whatever, right? So I think that an artifact can be worth like 10 additional 15 points. Fair. So let's say like next turn, worth 20 additional points, or if you're not playing Feds worth 0 points. So, because like everybody's interested in making their mission worth more, but Feds would be too morally bound to nuke an opponent's mission down to 0. So that's what I would like to see the Genesis device change to. I think that change needs to be made. I think it should have been made already. Personally, I think that the Genesis device should have had that made already. It would still be a good card worthy of play, because at the very least it would always be an offensive weapon to nuke your opponent's planet mission. So it's still a very worthwhile card. And then like adding 15 points to another mission, yeah, that could be, I mean, just it being worth 15 points. We've seen off Zelbase be used for 15 points and people being very happy about those 15 points. So I think that making the Genesis device worth, 15 points offensively and nuking an opponent's points down to 0 defensively for non-Fed players would make it still a very good card, but not nearly as abusive. So that's what I'd like to see with that. Sona Observatory. I get that free ships are a subject of interest and it needs to be on the watch list because of it, but the fact of the matter is that those free ships require the Sona people to make them good. They're bad cards otherwise, and there are so many more efficient ways for decks to put an armada together. And again, those free ships are all ships that they can't fleet move. You can't load them onto a single ship and then send that fleet off to wherever, at least not in any significantly decent way. Because these Sona ships that are available is basically the Lysiria, the battleship, and the shuttle. Now the shuttle can be, of course, carried aboard Sona battleships or the Lysiria using engaged shuttle operations. But the Sona shuttles do have 7 weapons and stuff. But again, I mean, if you're seeding, here's the thing: if you're seeding a Sona Observatory and you're getting those cards there for free, then you're just playing Sona non-aligned. You're playing a Sona non-aligned, and your other non-aligned personnel can't report there. So it still takes some additional facility somewhere else that's getting you reports of your other personnel that are in the deck, and so you're splitting your forces. And the most efficient fleet decks are the ones that can report everybody in the same place and load their ships on, and then and be able to staff their ships and then wormhole them to wherever they need to go. So I get that it's a concern. I just don't see Sona Observatory it being enough of a concern. I have tried to build a Sona Battlefleet deck, and it runs up against that problem in a very significant way. And that's before the fact that battle decks are now hampered by the existence of Anti-Time Anomaly and the rebirth of Tox Utah's Supernova again. So I would say that I think this is definitely a subject of interest, but I'm not concerned about this in any way, shape, or form. And I think that this should have been removed already, because again, it's been a year and it hasn't been removed yet. So I'm surprised that it's still there. So those are my thoughts on the watch list. That's my thoughts on what happened with Austrian Nationals. If there's any cards that you think are a concern out there, please leave a comment under this video and I will respond about my thoughts. So if there's any cards that you think that should be on the watch list, cards that you think should be banned, definitely please leave a comment below, and I will give you my thoughts if you'd like me to give you my thoughts. So hope you enjoyed the video. Please like and subscribe. May the profits be with you.